Part 34. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 337. By the way, do you know what the definition of death is? The sloppy man suddenly asked. What? Subai was slightly lost in thought and didn't hear clearly what the sloppy man asked. The sloppy man thought that Subai was asking him directly and answering his questions. He smiled proudly, stood up, and opened the shoe cabinet behind the door. In the shoe cabinet, there were many books, some in foreign languages. There is also a Chinese translation. These are all books written by medical students on psychology and even theology on the definition of death. The sloppy man took out a few books and threw them on the ground. He pointed at the books and said, "My former master was a genius, I admit this, but I don't think he is a thinker. He will not waste his time thinking about these illusory things for no reason, so these things must be useful to him. As for me, I have a good habit of reading whatever books my former master reads, because I always feel that I will surpass him one day. What I can do now is to try my best to walk step by step before he passes. Position, try your best not to fall behind." There are three definitions of death: clinical death, biological death, and brain death. Clinical death is determined by doctors based on the patient's clinical vital signs. When the patient completely loses consciousness, his breathing and heartbeat have completely stopped, his blood pressure continues to be zero, and the above indicators cannot recover after a period of rescue, and his pupils are dilated, it can be judged as clinical death. This is also death in the legal sense. Biological death refers to the cessation of all cellular functions of a living body on the basis of clinical death. The other is brain death. Brain death refers to the standard for declaring death based on the permanent loss of function of the brainstem or the central nervous system above the brainstem. The patient has sustained severe disturbance of consciousness, all physiological reflexes disappear, the brain waves are straight, and all brainstem-evoked potentials disappear, but the patient still retains breathing, heartbeat, and blood pressure at a certain level. At this time, the patient can be defined as brain dead. Brain death is different from vegetative people. In vegetative people, the brain stem function is normal. Coma is only due to severe damage to the cerebral cortex or sudden depression. The patient can have spontaneous breathing, heartbeat, and brainstem reaction, while in brain death, there is no spontaneous breathing. Is permanent and irreversible. The sloppy man was talking to himself there, as if he was caught in some kind of narcissistic thought, while Subai was a little worried and uneasy. His uneasiness did not lie in the content of the sloppy man's soliloquy, but in the directness of it. He squatted down in front of the fish tank and looked at the brain in the fish tank. For a moment, some kind of thought seemed to be running around in his mind. Seeing that Subai was no longer listening to him, the sloppy man said with some dissatisfaction, "You guys, can't you even control death?" Subai frowned slightly after hearing this question, and then nodded. For the audience, if you don't die in the real world, you have to accept the call from the horror broadcast to the story world again and again. Then, this is it. The sloppy man stood up and walked back to the laboratory. About a quarter of an hour later, he came out with a bunch of potions in his hand. Her brain actually still retains relatively complete memories. So, to a certain extent, she is not considered dead because her soul, her spirit, is still there. The meaning of a person's existence, the biggest support and carrier, is actually memory. I have always had an idea of eternal life in my mind. This idea of immortality is easier to realize than the immortality of the current popular trend. At this time, Subai finally broke away from his complicated thoughts and sat cross-legged on the floor tiles. He looked at the sloppy man and said, "You are a scientist, but now you look like a philosopher. World relations are people's general and fundamental views on the world, universe, and methodology is the most general and fundamental way of thinking and thinking that guides people to understand and transform the world. The research done by my former master and I is unprecedented, So our worldview and methodology must also be ahead of the curve, otherwise our research will be useless. In fact, memory is really the key to a person's eternal life. Imagine if human memory could be stored like a USB flash drive, and then inserted into another pure white paper-like organism after the death of one organism. Paste and copy memories. New people and old people. Do you think there is any difference between them? Especially if he doesn't even understand that he has changed his body, is there any difference? The exact same memories, the exact same personality, the exact same self-awareness, the exact same social outlook on life and values, they are exactly the same. But their genes are different, their vital signs, fingerprints, and blood types are all different. Continue. Subai listened with interest. She told me this before, how to confirm a person's death and still use his soul. This is actually the biggest difficulty of the accompanying soul technology. Because of your group, life and death are not defined by you, but by another organization and another person. What we have to do is to let them be judged dead while preserving maximum availability. Subai had completely figured it out at this time and said, destroy memory. Yes, it is to destroy the memory and erase her memory. She forgets her own experience, who she is, what she has experienced, and many, many things. This can change her character and any of her values. Then she is no longer her original self, and her original self is actually dead. As the sloppy man spoke, he began to mix the potion in his hand. I want to add these medicines to the fish tank, but I need your help. My method treats the symptoms rather than the root cause. It destroys her brain neural circuits. It only destroys her in a physical sense, but the soul and spirit are. An unknown attribute exists that transcends physical rules and physical definitions. For example, it's like the two of us are teaming up to rob. I am responsible for blowing up the walls and gates of this family and destroying all the security facilities in her home. You are responsible for going in and killing people. Do you understand? Subai nodded, but why are you so keen on this? Common problem. The sloppy man took a deep breath, as if he had become very nervous at this time. I don't dare to investigate your organization like my former master, but I think I can deceive that existence's judgment and judgment. Feeling excited and proud to know. In the eyes of ordinary people, what is the difference between you and God? And what is that existence? Zeus. God. The Jade Emperor? Just thinking about it makes me feel uncontrollable. Okay, Subai shook his head. Perhaps, only a person with this kind of crazy personality can truly innovate such a kind of science, let's call it science. Okay, the potion has been poured in, and I have connected a closed circuit to the fish tank. Now try to see if you can put your spirit or consciousness into it. I don't understand what you call this behavior. Why, but can this be done, right? Subai didn't answer, but silently placed his palm on the edge of the fish tank. A slight numbing sensation came from his fingers, and Subai began to put his consciousness into it. Everything is very easy to enter. It really takes no effort at all. Subai's consciousness entered a messy chaos. The place seemed to have been burned by fire, bombed, and completely destroyed. However, in the depths of this chaos, there is a red halo hiding there shivering. Because they were all members of the consciousness group, Subai could clearly sense the fear and anger coming from him, as well as the hint of pleading. However, at this time, it was too late to recover. Subai knew that if the little girl could not be confirmed dead, then everything before would be in vain. Once the terror broadcast summoned the little girl into the story world, her injuries would be restored. A real mortal enemy will appear in front of him. This is definitely not a scene Subai wants to see. The next moment, Subai began to desperately squeeze and tear the already weak red halo. Under Subai's almost brutal tearing, the aperture had been completely broken. At this time, Subai began to withdraw his consciousness and prepared to escape. Around him, in addition to chaos and chaos, there were fragments of memories. Fragments, obviously, the little girl's memory has been fundamentally erased. A voice began to sound here, very loud and confusing. Who I am. Who I am. Who am I? I'm in so much pain. I feel terrible. Who I am. Who am I? With or without me. With or without me. This voice sometimes sounds like a Lolita sound, and sometimes it sounds like an old woman grinding and roaring at the top of her lungs. Apparently, she has forgotten who she is and her age naturally. There was even a male voice at the end. She didn't even remember her own gender. Everything was completed smoothly. At the moment when Sudbai's consciousness finally exited, the voice there seemed to have discovered something. It's you, who are you, who are you? It was you who made me become like this, wasn't it? It's you. It's you. It's you. It must be you. I hate you. I hate you. I want revenge on you. I will never let you go. Don't give me this chance, otherwise I will make you regret your actions today forever. Sudbai didn't hear these sounds because he had already opened his eyes at this time. Immediately. Take a long breath. In fact, it was still a bit tiring. After all, Sudbai was really not good at using souls. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 338. After doing all this, Sudbai stood up, took out a tissue from the table and wiped the sweat on his forehead. You should use these potions first. The potion production process is relatively long, so although my level is enough to ensure a very low failure rate, I still can't make too many for you at once. In addition, she just brought me a batch of materials and resources this morning, which is enough for me to use for a while. Please leave your contact information. If I have any experimental needs, I will contact you. The sloppy man seemed very calm when he said these words. His mind was indeed not on other aspects, but only on research. This kind of person can actually be said to be very pure to a certain extent. Do you have WeChat? Sudbai asked. Yes, then add WeChat. After adding WeChat, Sudbai carried his satchel and left here. The little girl's brain will continue to be kept in that room. If Sudbai finds someone who needs to fuse the companion soul in this way in the future, this can be used as trading chips. When the car started, Sudbai glanced at the two Hellfire shotguns he placed on the passenger seat. To fuse the natal weapon, you need to establish a high degree of resonance with the weapon, and then integrate the magic weapon into your own body. Currently, the weapons that have been with you the longest and are the most familiar are undoubtedly these two Hellfire shotguns. But, can you really integrate these two guns into your body? What does the fusion of natal weapons feel like? Sudbai didn't know all this. Fatty and Monk had actually reached the time to fuse their natal weapons long ago, but they didn't proceed. They were undoubtedly still doubting and making choices. If they entered the story world at the beginning and got the first pot of gold, if choosing the first enhancement is considered as the first choice, then, the fusion of natal weapons is undoubtedly the second choice. Many listeners will be blind and forced when making the first choice, so when faced with the second chance, they will be cautious and cautious again. Sudbai couldn't say whether he was right or wrong when he first chose the ruined vampire enhancement, whether it was suitable or inappropriate. If measured by the theory that results determine everything, Sudbai is still alive now and has not died like other unfortunate listeners. Becoming someone ignored by the entire world and society can prove that your original choice was correct. However, if my bloodline is normal and I can take the enhanced redemption route that other listeners can take, then I really don't have to work so hard sometimes, and at least I can see clearly which direction the future road is going to take. Unlike now, Sudbai Qingming knew that his desire and enthusiasm for story points were no longer what they used to be. It is now 4:30 in the morning, and the breakfast shop has not yet opened. It is also the time when most of the food stalls have withdrawn their stalls and gone home. Therefore, even in this busy city of Shanghai, it is rare for a short period of time to appear during this period. Peaceful. Subai did not drive back directly, but parked the car in front of a breakfast shop. The door of the shop was not open yet, but people could be seen busy inside on the roadside. Breakfast is actually very hard work. You have to get up very early every day to prepare it. Subai didn't rush him. He just wanted to wait another half an hour and buy 2 drawers of freshly baked buns and 2 cups of soy milk to take back. At that time, the little guy just woke up, and the father and son could have dinner together. The little guy was already asleep when he went back last night, and he probably didn't know that his father was back. Subai lit a cigarette and waited slowly. Subai was not in a hurry. However, just when he finished half of the cigarette, the door of the ramen restaurant in front of him opened and the lights inside turned on. Subai was a little surprised. According to his daily habits, ramen restaurants rarely competed in the breakfast industry. Thinking that he was really hungry now. After catching a flight last night and going to Frankenstein's house, he didn't have time to eat. Subai decided to get a bowl of beef ramen first and wait until he finished eating the noodles. The breakfast restaurant is now ready to open for business. After turning off the engine and getting out of the car, Subai walked towards the ramen restaurant. After walking in, Subai found that the decoration of this ramen restaurant was very good and clean, and it really reflected the owner's thoughts. There are several office buildings nearby the store, so most of its customers are white-collar workers. Of course, with the development of the times, the so-called white-collar workers are no longer as enviable as they were 7 or 8 years ago. 8 years ago, most people were envious of those who could sit in office buildings and wear clean clothes and do decent jobs. The term white-collar also became very high-class, and it was once distinct from blue-collar. Limit. But now it seems that the so-called white-collar workers and blue-collar workers are nothing more than wage earners wearing different clothes. White-collar workers may look a little more glamorous, but the hard work and sweat of working in big cities are actually the same amount. However, the elegant decoration of this ramen shop is indeed very attractive to those people in the neighborhood who have precious time and a lot of things to do and who like to pursue a little bit of quality of life. After sitting down, Subai found that there were obvious signs of knocks on the table and chairs. Even a large part of the glass windows in the kitchen were added later. After a closer look at the bright storefront, it was not difficult to see that it had been opened. It's been patched. Putting patches on a new piece of clothing is indeed a strange thing. Handsome guy, what do you want to eat? A waitress in blue overalls came over and asked. She was still holding a rag in her hand. The store had just opened, and cleaning and other things could not stop. Beef ramen, a big bowl, add more chopped green onion and coriander, and add a portion of beef. Yes, please wait a moment. The waitress immediately walked to the back and said to a middle-aged chef who was kneading the noodles, a big bowl of beef ramen, add more coriander and green onions, and add a portion of beef. I want it. The master responded. It seems that this is a mom and pop shop and the couple is from Sichuan. The waitress started sweeping the floor again. When passing by Subai, Subai asked, the store opens early enough. The waitress's face changed, and she seemed a little unhappy. Of course, this kind of unhappiness was not for Subai. I spent a lot of money renovating the Pangxia store. I want to earn back the capital as soon as possible. Not many people came to eat ramen in the morning, but there was one. Where are you from, Sichuan? Subai asked. Did you hear it? The waitress said with some surprise, it's from Chengdu. I grew up in Chengdu when I was a child. That's a good relationship. This is the first time our store has opened in a while, and I met a fellow countryman. My sister-in-law will get you another pickle. My sister-in-law invited me. Yes, Subai said. Soon, a bowl of beef ramen was served. There was a lot of beef, spread out on a full layer, and a plate of spicy cabbage, which looked very appetizing. Subai picked up the chopsticks and just stirred the noodles. When he was about to eat, there was a sudden messy noise outside. "Close the door, close the door." The boss, who was also a ramen chef, immediately ran out and closed the store door with his wife, and also locked it. About 7 or 8 people gathered outside, shouting something, but it was not a local accent, even at such a close distance. Subai still didn't hear clearly what they were shouting. Subai ate 2 mouthfuls of noodles, drank a big mouthful of soup, and chewed some spicy cabbage. The spicy cabbage was very refreshing and tasted really good. I remember when Chu Zhao and Suner asked Subai to travel to Sichuan a few years ago, they arrived. In a restaurant, the owner also brought kimchi as a gift. In most Sichuan restaurants, kimchi is basically given away for free, and there is no charge. That boy Chu Zhao was surprised to say that Korean kimchi is also served here. The boss was amused for a while. In fact, the history of kimchi in China is much longer than that in South Korea. As we ate, the noise outside did not decrease, but intensified. From the 7 or 8 people gathered at the beginning to more than a dozen or even nearly 20 people at the end, it was very noisy and chaotic early in the morning. "Underworld?" Subai asked the boss sitting next to him at this time. The boss shook his head. Some of them also opened a ramen shop on the opposite street. They came here when we opened last time and said that opening our ramen shop here would affect their business. What kind of agreement did they come up with? And a form saying that it is illegal for our ramen shop to open here. The landlady also sighed. It's better this time. They were just having a quarrel outside. Last time, they rushed in and smashed up the store. The police also came, but it was of no use. They were arrested and it didn't take half a month, it was released again. There was nothing we could do about this store. After investing so much money, we, the young couple, figured that the news was over, so we planned to open the store again this morning. Who knew they would open it again so soon? Coming. Subai suddenly realized, turned his head and looked at the clothes of the noisy crowd outside, and finally understood what was going on. At that moment, he didn't say anything and continued to eat his noodles. The sky gradually started to get brighter, and the flow of people suddenly increased. The store entrance also began to attract more people. Many of them were actually citizens who stopped to watch the excitement. After paying the bill, Subai took out a paper towel and wiped his mouth. He was about to leave the ramen shop to buy breakfast. However, the proprietress immediately stood up to dissuade Subai and said, "Brother, let's go through the back door. I really don't dare when they are outside open the front door." The group of people at the door stopped making trouble outside, and instead sat on the steps one by one, as if they were meditating, but at the same time it was also a demonstration. In this way, let alone the boss who did not dare to open the door, even if he opened the door, he would probably not open the door. No customer dares to come over and eat noodles. At this moment, another group of people came outside. Subai touched his chin in surprise. "Plainclothes police." The boss smiled bitterly and shook his head, with a touch of emotion on his face, and sighed. "Honey, the noodle diners are here. Open the door and you greet them while I go to the kitchen to pull the noodles." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 339. The people who came probably did not come together, but a few came first, then a few more, and finally more and more people came. In the end, there were nearly 40 people, and 40 people were gathered together to give. They are confident enough. Among them, there are men and women, old and young. Of course, most of them are still in their 20s and 30s, a group of people who can barely be called young people. Everyone is dressed differently, and they are not from the same industry or place. Some come by car, some come by taxi, and some come by subway. These people, because of the large number of people, had the confidence to walk towards the store together. The group of people who had been blocking the door of the ramen shop since early in the morning stood up and tried to stop him. They didn't dare to hit or curse anyone, but they just held up their arms and blocked it. "Get out of the way, I want to eat noodles and rush to work." "Yeah, get out of the way, we want to eat noodles." "Get out of the way, you are being unreasonable." There is strength in numbers, and the law does not punish the masses. This is a common law in any country or region, because having a large number of people can bring confidence to people, and at the same time, it can also bring enough scruples to those above. Outside the door, the pushing and shoving began. Neither party dared to hit anyone, they just relied on their bodies to stop them. Sudbai in the store looked at the shop owner's wife. "Did you inform me?" "No, I don't know." From the look in the shop owner's eyes, Sudbai could tell that she was not lying. Soon, the people watching over there began to join in. After all, China now is not the China before. With the popularization and development of the internet, people's wisdom is indeed in a process of rapid progress. National events may be manipulated with ulterior motives. The media's misleading news to gain attention may be that most of the general public are confused, but for local residents, how could they not have heard about some things that happened around them? Information channels such as Ordinary Friends, Circle of Friends, local online forums, etc., without filtering and modification by the media, can actually explain things clearly with a few pictures and a few words. Before, everyone just stopped there and watched the excitement. In fact, they all knew what was going on, but no one dared to do anything, and no one was willing to do anything. But suddenly a group of people gathered and started to walk inside deliberately. When I went to eat ramen, there were many people watching around me who naturally joined in. As a result, the original obstruction suddenly seemed to collapse. Many people rushed in, randomly found a seat and started ordering dishes. They were basically ramen noodles, fried noodles, and other signature dishes of the ramen restaurant. The landlady kept telling the chef the names of the dishes, and the shop owner shouted loudly every time, "I want it." Every bowl of noodles and every customer was given a bottle of Coke when their noodles were served. This was considered a small gesture from the shop owner, and everyone was disrespectful. More and more customers came in outside, and the group of people who had gathered there to prevent people from opening the door for business gradually began to retreat. Obviously, they were not stupid, and they knew that if they caused trouble at this time, these customers would also be injured. They couldn't afford it if something unexpected happened, so they just retreated. "Brother, you've finished eating. You came early enough." A young man about 25 years old chatted with Sudbai while waiting for his ramen to come. Sudbai shook his head. In fact, Sudbai was a melon eater from the beginning to the end. Everyone in the store probably couldn't imagine what Sudbai experienced last night. It was absolutely unbelievable in their eyes, but Sudbai, it really has nothing to do with the beginning, development, and ending of this matter. After all, it is impossible for Sudbai to actually kill all the people who blocked the store outside the store. On the one hand, a mistake will not lead to death, and on the other hand, there is a terrorist broadcast, which is suspended above the heads of all listeners. Knife, so even if each of the listeners has power that can be called gods hidden in society, they cannot become blatant gods to carry out divine judgments. I was also reading the news on Moments this morning. Damn it, these guys smashed up the store last time and let it go. This time they want to stop them from opening a store again. The police are also a bunch of cowards who don't dare to do anything. I dare not really do anything to those people. So in the morning, after someone saw a group of people gathered in front of the store, he posted it on Moments, and many people forwarded it, calling on friends who are nearby and have time to come over and have a bowl of noodles. Hee, actually I don't like noodles very much, but I still came here specially. While the young man was talking, the noodles arrived, along with a complimentary bottle of Coke. The news has now spread, and forums and some local Weibo will post this news soon. I believe there will be many people who come here specifically to eat noodles today. Quite interesting. Sudbai said hello to the landlady, thanked her for the kimchi, and walked out of the ramen restaurant. By coincidence, Sudbai happened to see Chu Zhao outside. As Chu Zhao, it is obviously abnormal to come here for a stroll early in the morning. Chu Zhao also saw Sudbai coming out of it. He was so frightened that he broke into cold sweat. At the same time, he was extremely happy in his heart. He knew Sudbai's temper. After all, they had organized a murder club together before. Sudbai was real. The feeling of pure enjoyment of killing is like a drug addiction. At the same time, Chu Zhao also knows that Sudbai has many more audience experiences than himself, and his strength is also much higher, but Sudbai's character has not changed much, even becoming more extreme than before. Chu Zhao was really afraid that he had been in this ramen restaurant before, and then suddenly went crazy and killed all the people outside. What a coincidence! Sudbai walked over and said as if nothing was wrong. I brought a few people here to have a look, because I'm afraid something might happen. Chu Zhao looked at Sudbai. Are you ready to go back? No, go buy breakfast for the child. Let's go together, I haven't had breakfast either. Chu Zhao ordered the people around him to continue staring, and then walked to the breakfast shop in front with Sudbai. Do you think we are useless? Chu Zhao suddenly said. This is not your problem. After all, the police is also a profession. Sudbai stretched and lined up. Maybe. Chu Zhao shrugged. Actually, most of them are good, and there are only a small number of thornheads who always work together to cause trouble. No, it's not like that. Sudbai shook his head. In this group, a small number of people are making trouble, and the vast majority of people are keeping silent, but while they are silent, what they enjoy is those who are making trouble. Give them the benefits and preferential treatment they have won. Chu Zhao, do you know why people who broke the law in ancient times were guilty of implicating the 9 tribes? I don't know, Professor Su. Chu Zhao looked at Sudbai with a smile. Because the person who committed the crime has gained huge benefits, and this benefit has been shared by his entire family. The elderly can eat better, wear better clothes, and the children can hire better private teachers. It seems to me that it is a matter of course to enjoy this kind of benefit and finally bear the responsibility together. Your worldview is really twisted. The 9 implicated tribes can actually understand it this way. Boss, I want 5 cups of soy milk, this, and that. Chu Zhao obviously bought breakfast for several of his subordinates by himself. Sudbai just ordered some casually. After all, the little guy couldn't eat much by himself. The 2 people walked back with breakfast. Chu Zhao divided the breakfast he bought and sent Sudbai to the car. Chu Zhao, I don't believe that your worldview has not changed since you became an audience. There should be, but after getting over the initial fear, I was surprised to find that I actually got used to it. Sudbai didn't directly say that it was too slow for you to adapt. Instead, he nodded, opened the car door and got in. He put breakfast on the passenger seat. Chu Zhao put his hands on Sudbai's window. When did you come back? Yesterday. Want to go to your place for dinner tonight? You buy groceries. Let's go out to eat? I'll treat you. It seems that a lot of oil and water have been scraped. No matter how clean I am never as clean as you, Mr. Su. Actually, you can take care of this kind of thing. Sudbai still said this, you are already an audience anyway, why do you have so many scruples about things in reality? My parents are still here, and I don't want to do anything out of the ordinary to worry them. Chu Zhao smiled, just like you also have a son who needs your care and love. Besides, I have always believed that no matter how much I eat today, I will never worry about it in the future. You will also spit out a lot of things, right? It's actually spitting out now. Subai tapped his fingers lightly on the steering wheel. The policy has indeed gained a lot of tilt, because the constant quarrels and cliques have indeed led to judicial compromises, but correspondingly, the entire society will become more and more repulsive to them, in terms of education, work, etc., and they will be more and more repelled. In my opinion, what they gain is far less than what they are losing. After finishing speaking, Subai started the car and smiled. It's so interesting for us that two listeners are actually discussing this kind of issue so early in the morning. Chu Zhao suddenly said seriously at this time, Subai, you said. Chu Zhao pointed to the sky with his finger. Is it possible that one day it will be overthrown by the intolerable audience? You didn't realize that in fact, these two things, are there many similarities? A smile appeared on Subai's lips. Now for you, me, and most people, it is too unrealistic to think about this problem. Then what should I be thinking about now? Subai shifted into gear and the car slowly drove forward. Chu Zhao also let go of his hand and stood on the side of the road. Why in the next story world? Survive. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 340. Because the distance was relatively close, Subai was not greatly affected by Shanghai's morning rush hour. About a quarter of an hour later, the car drove into the parking lot under the building. The car backed in and turned off the engine. Subai did not get out of the car in a hurry, but took out a bottle of mineral water and took a sip. The words Chu Zhao just said to him seemed to still be echoing in his ears. These were definitely not unintentional words or Chu Zhao's whim. Subai has always known Chu Zhao's character. In today's popular terms, he is a weakling. Because Chu Zhao has a strong father, unlike Subai's family and Sunu's family, Chu Zhao's family really grew up step by step from the grassroots. Chu Zhao's father relied on his ability in criminal investigation to continue to work hard. As he climbed up the ranks, he gradually gained influence that cannot be underestimated in the public security system, but at the same time, Chu Zhao's father was an absolutely strict father and a male chauvinist, just like the ancient feudal emperors who wanted to pass down the world to the same is true for their own sons. In fact, most accomplished men hope to pass on everything they have to their children. Therefore, Chu Zhao, who had always disliked the police profession, was forced to go to the police academy, and was forced to slowly move up the ranks after becoming a criminal policeman. From childhood to adulthood, Chu Zhao was divided into he was in a very depressed state, and later he hit it off when he established a murder club. Chu Zhao's purpose was more to repel and retaliate against the police uniform he wore. Subai also contacted Chu Zhao a while ago. He was still worried about entering the next story world and seemed very anxious. Subai was also a person who had been there before. This phenomenon only shows that Chu Zhao's psychological quality has not been adjusted at all. Maybe this is a kind of normal listener, but compared to his pursuit of excitement and the absolute calmness of Fatty Monk and others, Chu Zhao is really far behind. Generally, this kind of people are really easy to die in the story world. But what did Chu Zhao say just now? Resist. Uprising. Overthrow terror broadcast. Subai frowned. Others were not familiar with Chu Zhao, but he was relatively familiar with it. Chu Zhao suddenly said these words, and the excitement and temptation in them were obvious. If nothing unexpected happened, Chu Zhao should have come into contact with someone or some organization, and this organization should not belong to the secular world, otherwise Chu Zhao's mentality would not have had such an obvious and huge change. Whether it is Buddhism, Taoism, or Christianity and other secular religions, they all appear so ridiculous in the audience's worldview. On the one hand, the shadow of the absolute dominance of terror broadcasts is too serious, on the other hand, It is absolutely most of the listeners have seen other listeners or even themselves use the abilities that can only be used by gods in religious myths and legends in Taoism, Buddhism, Christianity, etc. And this is not a miracle given by faith, but just the Kongbu 66 public simply redeem via WeChat ID in the WeChat store. Sudbai's eyes narrowed slightly at this time. Could it be said that a religion has emerged among the audience? What religion is good at is exploiting human beings' fears about certain aspects and then providing a utopia of spiritual belief. Therefore, even though these listeners are almost godlike existences in the eyes of ordinary people, they also have greater fears than ordinary people. It is true that it has the soil for the breeding and development of religion. Sudbai was hesitating whether to call Chu Zhao and ask, but then his mind changed. Which one was the most suitable for Chu Zhao? Should we continue to live with a firm belief or should we live in fear all day long? Sudbai pursed his lips. It seemed that his understanding of religion was a bit narrow. But at this moment, Sudbai's cell phone rang, and it was a voice application from Qin Yang. Sudbai met this guy in the Vote to Kill story world, but it can't be considered an acquaintance. In short, Qin Yang's courage and calmness at that time left a deep impression on Sudbai. Later, the two met in Qinhuangdao. However, Qin Yang happened to take Sudbai for a ride when he was working as a taxi driver. The two of them added WeChat in the car. To be honest, Sudbai's move to sell out his family property was somewhat influenced by Qin Yang. But in terms of friendship, Sudbai and Qin Yang really can't be considered very close, they are far worse than Fatty Monk and the others. After agreeing to the voice application, Qin Yang's deep voice came from the other end of the phone. I have something I want to ask you about. Tell me. Sudbai got out of the car, holding a cell phone in one hand and breakfast in the other to go upstairs. There seems to be an organization emerging in Beijing, Tianjin, and Tang Dynasty recently, an audience organization. I would like to ask you if there is any news in the Yangtze River Delta. Sudbai was suddenly stunned. Is this too much of a coincidence? Or maybe the coverage of that organization is too large, which is why this kind of coincidence occurs, just like a net spread widely, and two fish in the pond that are familiar with each other touch the net at the same time. The probability suddenly becomes very high. It's not very clear, but there are some hints. Sudbai replied. That organization invited me to be an elder. Qin Yang continued, but I refused. Elder Qin, he sounds quite majestic. This organization is specifically for low-level listeners, even starting at the experiencer level. I'm actually a little curious, so I want to find out about it from you. What do you think the nature of this organization is? Sudbai asked. I don't know. The organizers of the audience forum are to get more information and take a share of the transaction, but this organization makes me feel more like Li Yang's crazy English in the past. Their teachings and regulations I've seen some of them and I feel they are quite positive. Then why do you still refuse? Isn't this a good thing? Is there love for no reason among the listeners? That's right. Sudbai still doesn't know the purpose of Qin Yang contacting him. Okay, I'm really just calling to ask you about the situation there. If it's just an organization built by a few of my senior listeners, you don't need to worry about it, but if this organization has quietly extended its reach to at a very broad level, it may have a lot of impact on our level in the future. You can imagine that if you enter a story world similar to Voting to Kill or a story world that requires team formation, the gathering of listeners in the organization who have been brainwashed to call each other brothers and sisters will be very difficult. I understand. Sudbai nodded. When my next story world ends, I will take some time to investigate. Well, okay, that's it, goodbye. Goodbye. After hanging up the phone, Sudbai returned to his office, put breakfast in the microwave for a while, then went to the bedroom and kissed the little guy on the face. The little guy was about to wake up at this time. After receiving such a kiss from Sudbai, he immediately rubbed his eyes. When he found out that his father was back, the little guy immediately chuckled. After having a fuss with Sudbai on the bed for a while, Subai picked him up to have breakfast. My life at home is relatively quiet and ordinary. I play with blocks and watch Ultraman every day with my little one, and then I take the time to practice some of my skills. It is quite fulfilling every day. Subai used his story points to exchange for some talisman papers, spiritual water and other props, but not much, because since the horror broadcast informed and hinted at the theme of his next story world in advance, it was impossible for Subai to allow it. If you bring too many things into it, otherwise the difficulty of this story world will be too low. After counting the days, Subai cooked a table of meals himself, then went to the supermarket to buy a lot of snacks, milk, etc., and stored them in the refrigerator. After having dinner with the little guy, Subai hugged the little guy. Watch anime in bed. The little guy fell asleep around 11 o'clock and slept soundly. He gently put the little guy down and covered him with the quilt. Jixiang also came over at this time, jumped on the bed, and curled up next to the little guy. Jixiang knew that Subai's time was up, so it was his turn to take care of him. Little guy. After getting dressed, he sat down behind his desk. Subai lit a cigarette and put a backpack on his lap. Subai didn't know how many things could be brought into the story world in this backpack, but he is quite open-minded. Listeners like Chu Zhao need to seek spiritual support and massage from the outside world, but people like Subai don't need it at all. For Subai, the story world is a complete taste. Every time he is about to enter the story world, Subai is more filled with anticipation, excitement, and that feeling, can't wait. A white light appeared next to Subai. Task. Start. Hiss. Subai frowned, feeling a pain in his body, and slowly opened his eyes and woke up. The next moment, Subai found himself lying in the auditorium of a movie theater. He didn't know how long he had been lying there. In short, he felt numbness and soreness in many parts of his body. He slowly sat up. At this time, the advertisement at the beginning of the movie was playing on the giant screen in the screening hall. At the same time, around Subai, there were 14 other audience members sitting up with their hair disheveled and their clothes wrinkled. Everyone was subconsciously observing their surroundings, leading them to with an obviously scrutinizing and vigilant gaze. Here. They are all listeners. Dear listeners, hello, welcome to the Horror Radio Show. I am the host of the show. I don't have a name, because the name has no meaning here. The movie is about to start, so I won't waste everyone's time. Main Mission 1, one of the many employees in the cinema is not real. I hope you can find it out in one day. Okay, now, let's enjoy this movie first. If you are interested, you may also think so. If you have enough time. Subai couldn't help but touched his forehead. It's such an ambiguous main quest prompt. The restrictions, requirements, rewards, and punishments all end without any explanation. Besides, the name of the story world is not called Tomb of Blood Corpses. Why is the scene in the cinema again? The name shows that the IMAX theater is definitely a modern product, which means that the background of this story has nothing to do with the ancient tombs, imperial tombs, deserted villages, etc. that Subai had thought of before. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 341. Subai didn't know that among the 15 listeners including himself, some of them had been predicted in advance by the name of the story world before. This time, there should be no low-level listeners like experiencers, because everyone was spending the time. After the initial shock, they began to subconsciously control their emotions and started a self-protection mode. Because everyone knows that in the story world, the local environment and indigenous people of the story world can undoubtedly bring you great danger, but the listeners around you may also kill you at any time. After all, in the story world, there is no relationship between the listeners. The fighting is not calculated into cause and effect, and has a greater degree of freedom than in the real world. Everyone tacitly did not leave their seats. Before the movie was shown, the wedding dress ads, diamond ring ads, etc. were shown in sequence for about 7 or 8 minutes before the main film started. The plot of the movie was very familiar to everyone. After playing for about a few minutes, Subai also understood that this was the film of Jurassic Park, and it was a film of its time. But nowadays, because the ticket price of 3D movies is generally much more expensive than that of 2D movies, even if it is not suitable for 3D, movies are still made into 3D, and at the same time, old movies are beginning to be remade into 3D and make a big splash at the box office. Gradually, after the movie was shown for 20 minutes, the audience began to leave their seats. Subai understood their behavior, because there were no clues in this movie, and there was no difference between it and the old version, so continuing to watch it would probably be a waste of time. Instead of sitting here and watching it for 2 hours, it is better for the movie to start looking for clues now to facilitate the completion of main task 1. Whoever completes main task 1 should follow the meaning of the task prompts that everyone should enter main task 2 together, but according to the horror broadcast, the income is distributed according to contribution. The style must be whoever discovers it first or who contributes the most will ultimately gain the most. At the same time, the terror broadcast did not explain the result of the mission failure, which instead gave many people present a sense of mental tension. The unknown is the biggest fear. Subai continued to sit in his seat leisurely. Since the movie had started, he continued to watch. Those anxious people left the scene first, which made Subai less anxious. For Subai now, story points are indeed not very attractive. Subai took out a cigarette and lit one. He looked for it subconsciously. It was very good. He didn't bring his backpack into the story world at all, and he didn't have a mobile phone either. There was only a pack of cigarettes and a lighter left in his pocket. The review of horror broadcasts this time is indeed strict enough. Handsome guy, borrow a lighter. A woman in her early 20s sat down next to Subai, holding a thin cigarette in her hand. Subai threw the lighter over. The woman lit the cigarette and handed the lighter back to Subai. I put the lighter in my wallet, but this time the terrorist broadcast didn't even allow me to bring my wallet, which is interesting. The woman blew out a smoke ring. She looked pretty good, above average, not very tall, and a bit thin. A very refreshing girl, she shows a neat energy even when she smokes. Let's get to know each other. My name is Chu Ting. What about you? Subai said her name. To be honest, the audience was eager to form cliques before the world of the story was really laid out at the beginning. This in itself illustrates her own lack of self-confidence. From the side, it shows that her strength is not very outstanding. The relationship between the audience is actually very snobbish. If you are strong, you are useful to me, and we can be friends. But if you are not good enough, you still want to hug me. I'm sorry, but get away as far as you can. Seeing that Subai had no intention of making friends or joining forces, Chu Ting stood up and walked towards the other audience while smoking. Subai shook the ash from his cigarette, and his eyes fell on the man sitting diagonally to the left in the row in front of him. The man was not wearing 3D glasses, but a pair of sunglasses. From such a close distance, Subai could hear him. Light snoring. 15 listeners. About 8 people left the theater before the movie ended to investigate, and this person actually fell asleep leaning on his chair. If the possibility of deliberately pretending to be 13 is ruled out, he should be very determined and calm. Performance. In fact, Subai has basically watched the Jurassic series of movies. This movie did make Subai a bit boring. When it was about to end, Subai didn't intend to continue watching. He got up and prepared to go to the toilet first. As a result, the person who was sleeping in the row in front of him actually woke up at this time, got up, and left the screening room with Subai almost in a hurry. There were no other guests in the cinema, but there were quite a few service staff. Those at the ticket office, those selling snacks, those cleaning the house, etc. were indeed the standard number of people. This just seemed a bit embarrassing and obviously unreal. It was so big. How can a movie theater in China only have 15 guests in one auditorium? In the bathroom, Subai was washing his hands after finishing his toilet. The man in sunglasses also came over to wash his hands at this time. Subai could feel that the man in sunglasses had been observing him. It seems that the man in sunglasses is not that absolutely calm. Both of them finished washing their hands. Subai stood outside the bathroom, and the man in sunglasses also stood there. Opposite the bathroom was the cleaner's office, and the man in sunglasses walked directly in. Next to Subai, there was a billboard, all fluorescent, announcing the upcoming movie. At this time, the girl named Chu Ting followed another girl and a middle-aged man to the toilet. Obviously, she had found a companion. Naturally, Chu Ting would not be stupid enough to show off to Subai or show off to Subai. There are no experiencers here. They are all listeners who have experienced the baptism of the story world at least several times. Everyone knows that they can refuse the release of another listener very calmly. The people who join forces with Signal must have their own backing. Anyone who casually makes enemies in the story world with nothing to do has something wrong with their brains. However, it was obviously impossible for Chu Ting to come over and have sex with Subai. Chu Ting casually threw the cigarette in her hand on the ground, and then entered the women's bathroom with another woman. The middle-aged man entered the men's room. Obviously, no one has been able to find out the true result of main mission 1. One of the staff in the cinema is not real. Which one is it? The main task 1 is really very vague. The more vague it is, the more it means that the hidden rules and regulations must be explored by the audience themselves. Otherwise, according to Subai's thinking model, all the people in the cinema will be the staff gathered together and killed them one by one. Are they afraid that they can't find the fake one? Suddenly, Subai's eyes fell on the ground. From the bathroom to each movie theater, there were green carpets. The place where Subai was staring now was the place where Chu Ting had just dropped her cigarette butt. Reaching out and picking up the last burning cigarette butt, Subai found that there was no trace of scorch on the carpet. But just now, Subai clearly noticed that there was actually a wisp of black smoke produced by the cigarette butt and the carpet, which proved that the carpet was indeed burned by the cigarette butt, and his keen sense of smell also caught a burnt smell. It won't burn. The man in sunglasses walked out of the cleaner's office and looked at Subai, who was squatting there holding a cigarette butt. Then, he naturally broke the broom in his hand, but the next moment, the broom returned to its original state. Everything in the cinema has its own self-healing ability. We can't destroy it, no matter how strong you are, you can't destroy it. Subai nodded, indicating that he understood. The man in sunglasses didn't stay here for long. He threw the broom on the ground and walked out directly. Subai stretched out his hand and drew a deep mark on the wall, but soon the mark disappeared and everything returned to the same state as before. This was indeed the case. So, are there any hidden rules? Ah! A scream came from the women's restroom, followed by violent energy fluctuations from the women's restroom. People near the restroom rushed over immediately, including the man in sunglasses who had just left here. At this time, it was obvious that he no longer cared about the issue of the women's restroom and the men's restroom. The man in sunglasses was the first to open the door of the women's restroom and rush in. The rest of the people also followed in, and Subai was no exception. The women's restroom seems a bit empty, which shows that from the design to the completion of the cinema, the land area is really not tight at all. Chu Ting was sitting softly on the ground, with a look of disbelief on her face. Subai noticed the burning sensation still remaining on Chu Ting's palm. She should have strengthened the fire element, but she didn't know if it was magic or Taoism. First of all, the fire coming from the bathroom before was probably her using a skill. This actually shows a detail, that is, Chu Ting can easily light a cigarette even without a lighter. She really deliberately approached Subai when she asked to borrow a lighter. In a bathroom stall facing Chu Ting, there was a woman with her head buried in the toilet, her back, hips, and hips raised. Her jeans were torn open, exposing her white thighs. This posture was very indecent, this kind of death. The gesture also made the audience present feel a kind of anger. Because the woman who died was the female audience member who had just walked into the toilet with Chu Ting. Did the danger come so suddenly, and was it such a way to die that was almost humiliating? The man in sunglasses first went to look at the corpse and pulled the head out of the toilet, but soon there was a crisp sound and the head of the corpse was still in the toilet, and the headless corpse fell down slumped. Immediately, the man in sunglasses and some of the surrounding audience focused their attention on Chu Ting, who was still in shock. Obviously, either Chu Ting knew and saw something, and this must be announced. Either there may be a problem with Chu Ting's identity. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 342. We went to the toilet together. Just now, I heard a strange noise coming from the next door, and then I heard Wang Tantan's cry. I immediately came out and tried to open her cubicle door, but it was locked from the inside. I kicked her. I couldn't kick it open, so I used my fireball to blast it, and the door was blown open, and it ended up like this. In the toilet, Chu Ting sat on the ground and said to the audience around her that she was not stupid. She could also see some clues in the eyes of the surrounding audience. Obviously, they were doubting herself now. But there are no marks on this compartment door. A middle-aged man wearing a peaked cap came out and asked. Oh, nothing here can be destroyed, the man in sunglasses said and grabbed the compartment door. In an instant, the compartment door returned to its original state. No facilities in the cinema can be destroyed. Everyone began to observe the dead Wang Tantan one by one, and Subai was no exception, but he waited until the end. Although Wang Yantian died in a miserable position, he did not suffer any kind of sexual intercourse, and there were no traces of semen spots on his smooth thighs. However, when Subai was inspecting the body, the guy wearing the peaked cap was actually standing next to him, and reached out to touch Wang Yantian's thigh. He seemed to have noticed Subai's gaze, and the peaked cap did not feel anything wrong. Normal, just muttered. It's such a shame, the legs are so slippery, they're my thing. It seems like this guy has a little bit of necrophilia. Subai didn't think it was much of a surprise. There were many people with special hobbies among the audience. For ordinary people, special hobbies are often caused by special personal experiences, and the special experiences experienced by the audience are definitely more. There are many more ordinary people, which can easily make these listeners look abnormal to normal people. The cause of Wang Tantan's death is unknown. It seemed that a very strong person had his head stuck in the toilet. Her body was still left in the bathroom, and no one went to clean it up. Most people now went to the cafe in front of the cinema. This cafe is also part of the cinema. The entire cinema is relatively large and is located in a building. On the 6th floor, in addition to the movie theater, there is also a cafe and a children's activity hall. Although the horror broadcast does not give a clear location limit, everyone is not a newcomer, so naturally they know what the consequences will be if they leave the obvious plot scope. Everyone's wallets and other items were confiscated by the horror broadcast. Basically, except for cigarettes and lighters, everyone had nothing left in their clothes, except a movie membership card. There is 1,000 yuan in each card, which can not only buy movie tickets, but also food and drink in the movie. It can be regarded as living expenses for all listeners of horror radio. There were 4 service staff in the coffee shop, and 8 or 9 people were sitting inside, and Subai was one of them. After ordering a cup of latte, Subai could feel that the audience around him were subconsciously observing the four waiters in the coffee shop. They didn't know the weirdness in the cinema now, and they didn't think that this was the only thing in such a large cinema. If something is wrong with people, this is the setting of the horror broadcast. In short, NPC will become very NPC. Wang Tiantian was the first person to die. Neither the cause of death nor the murderer could be determined. According to normal thinking, horror broadcasts would usually use the first person to die as a demonstration and explanation. This means that Wang Tiantian may not be a listener but a terrorist radio implanter. NPC, but this routine seems to have been used many times. Subai knows that the audience here may be strong or weak, but they all have rich experiences. There must be more than one person who thinks this way. But what if Wang Tantan is not an NPC? Subai's spoon was turning gently in the cup. If Wang Yantian was not an NPC, but died at the beginning of the story, then follow the conclusion and work backwards. In other words, Wang Yantian died at a very fast speed. She discovered the G-spot. It was very likely that she had made a major discovery, but she discovered it too suddenly and abruptly. The horror broadcast should not have said the one-day mission time it said, but a listener broke it in minutes. That's why he killed Wang Tantan, just to keep the story going for a while. The horror broadcast was not that tasteless. Then, it can be said that Wang Tiantian discovered it too suddenly. She was not prepared and she was not careful. This G-spot heralded the final answer and was also accompanied by huge dangers. She was so lucky and unlucky. Died. So, there must be a secret hidden in that bathroom. Subai picked up the teacup, took a sip, and when he was about to get up and leave, he glanced at everyone present. The peaked hat was not here, and the man in sunglasses was not here either. Chu Ting was sitting in a corner holding a cup of milk tea with a serious expression, but the other man besides Wang Tantan was not in the coffee shop before. Wait. I seem to have made the mistake of habitual thinking. Subai recalled the scene in his mind. Chu Ting came from outside with Wang Tantan and another middle-aged man. So, where did the three of them go before? The place they had been before might be the key, and the bathroom was probably just a crime scene. After leaving the coffee shop, Subai bought a ticket for a movie that was about to open and went into the theater after checking the tickets. The staff here were very strict about checking tickets and did not allow the audience to come in and out at will, and no audience dared to say so. Break in forcefully. After entering, Subai wandered between various movie halls. For some reason, he couldn't find the location of Chu Ting and the others. Could it be that they weren't here? What are you looking for? A hoarse voice sounded from behind Subai. Subai turned around and saw the man in sunglasses standing at the corner behind him. He must have just walked out of theater number 13, holding a glass of Coke in his hand. Where is the middle-aged man in the yellow coat? Subai asked directly. Actually, I was looking for him too, but couldn't find him, the man in sunglasses answered quickly. Subai nodded. There are nostalgic old movies playing inside. Do you want to come in and watch them together? The man in sunglasses pointed to the theater behind him and asked. What movie? The Shawshank Redemption, the man in sunglasses grinned. Very appropriate. Yes, it's very appropriate, but this version of the Shawshank Redemption is a little different from the original version. I didn't realize it until I just went in. Since he couldn't find the person he was looking for now, Subai walked in. The man in sunglasses pointed at the screen. Look, do you think it's different? The color harmony of the picture is wrong, Subai said. It's like. The man in sunglasses put down the Coke in his hand. Haha, why didn't I think of it just now, and I actually sat here and stared at it for so long. Screening room, Subai said these three words. Yes, the screening room. The man in sunglasses took a deep breath. I guess it's too late. What is going to happen must have happened. In modern cinemas, the screening room can basically control the playback of movies in all cinemas. It is no longer like the old cinemas in the past where a dedicated person was responsible for changing the film in each cinema. When Subai and the man in sunglasses came to the door of the screening room, they found the door wide open. When they walked in, they saw a dead body lying on the control panel. The man in sunglasses walked over and turned the body over, pursed his lips and said, "It's the man who walked with Wang Tantan and Chu Ting before." Subai clapped his hands gently and retreated to the door of the control room. "Did you really just think of this just now? Are you doubting me?" The man in sunglasses pointed at his face. "Please, I have never been in the film industry. I didn't think that it should be normal here. His body was lying here, touching some buttons and switch, that's why the colors in that theater seemed abnormal. Also, I think this matter is actually not that complicated, otherwise it would not have killed two people at the beginning, which means that these two people have actually discovered the crux of the problem is that these two guys were either too stupid or too greedy, so they failed to complete the mission and died." The man in sunglasses still seemed very calm. Subai walked over, touched the body of the man, and then checked the fingers and teeth of the man's body. "It's so disgusting," the man in sunglasses said as he watched Subai put his fingers into the corpse's mouth. "He doesn't smoke," Subai confirmed. "What's the connection between this?" The man in sunglasses was a little confused. "Do you know where Chu Ting went after leaving the screening room where we started?" "Oh, I know," the man in sunglasses smiled. "I asked this person about this before. They went to the small convenience store in the middle of the theater to buy some tissues and drinks, but I investigated that convenience store. But, nothing else was found." Subai left the control room directly. The man in sunglasses looked around and followed Subai out. The small convenience store in the middle of the theater is for those customers who come out to buy snacks or rush to the theater. It is very small and has only 2 service staff standing there. Subai bought a popcorn and a Coke there and walked out. "Don't tell me you're just hungry," the man in sunglasses followed up and asked. "Do you remember what I was doing when you came out of the janitor's office? Look at the cigarette butts on the carpet. The cigarette butt was thrown away by Chu Ting just now, and she didn't bring a lighter. I've checked the bodies of the man and Wang Canton just now, and they didn't smoke. So, do you think who lit the cigarette for Chu Ting is very important?" The man in sunglasses suddenly smiled, "But there is one detail you may have forgotten. Chu Ting herself has enhanced fire attributes. For her, lighting a cigarette is don't be too simple." The man in sunglasses rubbed his thumb against his mouth. Subai nodded, "Yes, for a listener who is seriously unsure of his own strength and eager to seek an alliance from the beginning, he will just light a cigarette and expose himself in front of other listeners he just met. Strengthen attributes." The man in sunglasses was stunned. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 343. You mean, Chu Ting borrowed a lighter from someone while walking from the cinema to the convenience store and then from the convenience store to the toilet, and the person who borrowed the lighter may be the person we need to find in main mission 1. Isn't that the real staff member in the movie theater at home? The man in sunglasses shrugged. This sounds really convoluted, but the idea you just expressed is just a possibility, because it is also possible that Chu Ting deliberately showed off her fire attribute enhancement for the sake of convenience or even to win over her newly formed allies. Everyone's sincere attitude and sincerity in spending this story world together. "But do you have any other clues?" Subai asked. "I can confirm that Chu Ting didn't have a lighter at the beginning. She borrowed it from me once, but it was nearly 2 years since I saw her throwing away a cigarette butt for the second time. For 10 minutes, that cigarette was definitely not the one you asked me to borrow a lighter to light." "Where is Chu Ting now?" the man in sunglasses asked. "It's probably enough to find Chu Ting and ask her." "She is in the coffee shop." Subai suddenly frowned. "At this time, 2 people have died." "Why did they die?" "He was killed by the suspect." Subai smiled. "So, the suspect can be defined as infinitely powerful and can easily kill all our listeners this time." Probably not possible. The man in sunglasses shook his head. That would be boring. If you find out that he is dead, you will die. If you can't find out that he failed the mission. The suspect shouldn't be infinitely powerful, or he shouldn't be really powerful. He won't be like that. Even if the weak audience discovers the suspect and wants to tell him face to face that you are not real, he will be killed. Then the powerful audience found out that the suspect went to tell him face to face that the suspect could not beat this powerful audience. This scene should not have happened, otherwise the fairness of main task 1 would be completely destroyed. For those who are weaker, it's so unfair to the audience. Why do you let them enter the story world when you've made it clear that you won't take them to play? Then what do you mean? The man in sunglasses didn't understand. I find it difficult to talk to you. You are not a detective in the real world, are you? Yes, Private Detective Sudbai replied without blushing at all. Oh, yes, the man in sunglasses became interested. Then I can hold my thigh. By the way, I actually understand what you just said. For example, the things destroyed here will be restored immediately, though it seems that the staff NPC also has its own established procedures. For example, if you guess wrong, you may suffer its punishment and backlash. Sudbai nodded. That should be the case, they must have guessed wrong. The man in sunglasses said, you and I have been having sex until now, and you only came to the conclusion that you might die if you guess the wrong person. Obviously, the man in sunglasses was a little speechless. Although this conclusion is very correct, it is estimated that no audience will deliberately guess the wrong person, just like if everyone wants to go back to the cinema from the cafe, they have to buy another ticket to check in. The audience is not fools, and will not deliberately provoke the NPCs here. No, there is a question here. What caused Chu Ting, who lit up the cigarette, to still be alive, and what caused Wang Tantan and the middle-aged man to guess wrong? Anyway, you'll know the answer now if you ask Chu Ting, right? The man in sunglasses grabbed a handful of popcorn from Sudbai's hand. Then let's go back first. The two people walked out of the theater again, but there was only one person left in the cafe where many people were sitting. A woman sat there quietly with a chicken steak and purple potato balls in front of her. Eat. This woman looks to be over 40 years old, but she is well maintained and looks a bit similar to Zhao Yazi. Where's the person? The man in sunglasses walked in and asked. The man in the peaked cap said he found a clue and took the girl named Chu Ting with him, and the others followed. The woman continued to eat her food slowly. Then what are you doing here? The man in sunglasses asked. I'm hungry, so I'm eating here. The woman looked at the man in sunglasses as if she were an idiot. The man in sunglasses and Sudbai looked at each other. Seeing that Sudbai had no intention of leaving, he walked out of the coffee shop, probably looking for the crowd. Sudbai sat down opposite the woman. Little brother, why don't you go? The woman asked while eating. If they can make it work, it will be the same for me. Haha, it seems that you are not interested in the story. After the woman finished eating, she took out a tissue and wiped her mouth. My sister's name is Zhenyu, what's your name? Sudbai. I've heard this name mentioned before. Which one? A fat man. He said that if you meet someone named Sudbai in the story world in the future, it's best to stay away from him, because sometimes his brain will be abnormal. Ha! Sudbai laughed dryly. Seeing Zhenyu getting up, he asked, where are you going? Let's go and take a look. What, little brother, are you coming together? Okay, let's go together. Zhenyu was wearing high heels, which surprised Sudbai slightly, because most of the audience would deliberately choose suitable sportswear before entering the story world. High heels will obviously affect the movement speed of the audience, except for the kind of unannounced. This may happen when entering the world of the story. Audiences who have notified the start time of the story in advance should not make such a low-level mistake in clothing. Ahead, we are about to leave the cinema. Sudbai reminded, because he saw Zhenyu not walking towards the cinema after walking out of the coffee shop, but continued walking out. "It's okay, I'm just taking a look." Zhenyu held the railing with both hands and stood on the inner edge of the 5th floor. The next floor should be a playground, and the 2 floors below should be clothing stores. The bottom floor looks like a large supermarket. Subai stood next to Zhenyu and looked down. Zhenyu's view was indeed good, but there were lights on the 4th floor downstairs but no customers or waiters. It looked very strange. Of course, this cinema was no better. Where to go? Since the main mission 1 takes place in a movie theater, the next missions should use the environments on the lower floors. Zhenyu smiled, so, there is no harm in taking a look in advance. "Are you going to give up on main mission 1? Subai asked. "Isn't it the same for you?" Zhenyu looked at Subai. "You seem to look down on the rewards from the main mission. In the story world, it's better to explore yourself instead of striving for story point rewards. The opportunity. However, those people have been here for so long, haven't they really cracked the main mission 1? Zhenyu looked at Subai and said, "Let's go take a look together. It is said that 2 people have died. If too many people die in one main mission, the subsequent missions will become more and more difficult." Subai and Zhenyu bought movie tickets respectively, passed the ticket gate and walked in, passing by the convenience store again. Further ahead, there was a group of people there, as if they were analyzing and discussing something together. Chu Ting was surrounded by everyone and kept being questioned. It can be seen that Chu Ting now has a tendency to go crazy and beat up. But she still endured it because she didn't dare to offend the public. When the man in sunglasses saw Subai and Zhenyu coming, he immediately left the crowd and walked over. "How's it going?" Subai asked. "I'm still tearing, but I want to ask a result. Have you seen the cleaner standing over there? He is the only one cleaning." Chu Ting and Wang Tiantian on their way back from the convenience store to the toilet. According to someone who had interacted with him, Chu Ting borrowed a lighter from him at that time, but it could not be lit. There was oil in the lighter and it could not make a fire. Later, Chu Ting simply used her own ability to light the cigarette. According to Chu Ting, she deliberately showed her enhanced attributes to gain the trust of the other 2 people. But look, the cleaner is still smoking there, proving that his lighter is usable, so there is a high possibility that he is a fake, because for a fake person, everything he has is actually doesn't exist. "Then what are you still arguing about?" Zhenyu asked. "The problem is that maybe Chu Ting, who was lighting the fire with her finger, didn't see it clearly at the time, but the other 2 people around her saw the cleaner come out with a cigarette in his mouth again, so, Wang Yantian and the man should also have guessed it's the cleaner who is fake, but you have also seen the fate of the 2 of them. Therefore, no one dares to go up to the cleaner and say that you are fake. Instead, they are threatening Chu Ting and asking her to go." Chu Ting didn't want to tell the cleaner that you were lying in front of her, so she wasn't stupid. However, if she doesn't go, everyone will think she is fake and will probably take action against her. Main mission 1 is about the staff in the cinema, so she shouldn't be counted," Zhenyu said doubtfully. This statement is actually very adaptable. What if Chu Ting is not an audience member, but the shareholder and boss behind the cinema? No one else in the cinema knows who she is, but in a broad sense, it can also be regarded as a cinema. The employees here should be implanted with a highly intelligent NPC, Subai explained. Haha, the mission prompts given in main mission 1 are too simple, so it can be interpreted casually. "Oh, that girl is going," Zhenyu pointed over there. Sure enough, under the pressure of everyone's life and death, Chu Ting walked towards the cleaner. Then, Chu Ting stood in front of the cleaner and said something. Then, the cleaner shook his head in confusion and turned around to mop the floor. Chu Ting turned around and looked at the people opposite, with a look on her face. With a look of horror, Chu Ting's body began to fall apart and fell to the ground. She guessed wrong. She is dead. Everyone was silent for a moment. This means that Chu Ting is the audience, which also means that the cleaner is not real. So, the deaths of Chu Ting, Wang Canton, and the middle-aged man only proved one thing, that is, the cleaner was real? The man in sunglasses suddenly smiled. What a waste. Yes, it's very wasteful. The total number of employees in the entire cinema is only about 15. Even if one audience's life is used to guess one by one, then the lives of 3 audience members can at least prove the authenticity of the 3 staff members. Now 3 people fighting against 1 person are really losing money. Zhen Yu shook her head at this time. It shouldn't be. This doesn't conform to the aesthetics of horror broadcasting. It's just main mission 1. It's not that difficult. 3 listeners have already died. A few more will die. The remaining main missions 2 and main mission 3, how many people can be left to do it? As Zhen Yu spoke, she took the initiative to walk towards the cleaner, and motioned for Subai and the man in sunglasses to follow. Subai and the man in sunglasses followed Zhen Yu. Even though Chu Ting's body is over there, the cleaners can't see anything. These NPCs will only do their own things and ignore any irregular phenomena. Master, I lost my lighter, can you lend me a lighter? Zhen Yu took out a box of cigarettes from her pocket, pulled out 2 cigarettes, held one herself, and handed the other to the cleaner. Smoking is prohibited in movie theaters, but for smokers, this is not a rule. Seeing Zhen Yu being so polite, the cleaner took the cigarette, lit it for himself first, and then handed the lighter to Zhen Yu, who also lit it. No problem. Obviously, Zhen Yu is now pretending to be Chu Ting, while Subai and the man in sunglasses correspond to Wang Tantan and the middle-aged man, but the plot is wrong from the beginning. What is going on? Subai seemed to have thought of something at this time and asked, Master, why do I remember that when a girl borrowed a lighter from you before, your lighter couldn't light up? Oh, that girl just said something to me inexplicably and then disappeared. Yes, that girl also borrowed a lighter from me, but today I wore the wrong work clothes. I wore Akin's work clothes. He also had a lighter in his pocket, but he couldn't use it. Later, I went directly to Akin to exchange our lighters. His lighter is a brand name and is worth a lot of money, but sometimes expensive things may not be very useful, right? Look, the guy who just came out of the toilet with a bucket is Akin. Another younger cleaner came out of the toilet carrying a bucket. Subai walked over immediately. Hello, can I borrow a lighter? Subai handed over a cigarette. Akin took the cigarette and took out a lighter to light the flame, but the cigarette could not light up. Then, Akin shook the lighter with the Zippo logo speechlessly. There's something wrong with the lighter, it can't light. But Subai clearly saw fire coming out of the lighter, but the cigarette butt did not change at all when he put it against it. I'll do it. Subai took the lighter from Akin and lit it. Instead of lighting the cigarette, he put the flame in the palm of his hand. No temperature. No feelings. It doesn't hurt at all. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 344. You're not serious, Subai said. After hearing this, Akin smiled and nodded, and then his body began to become fragmented. Finally, it turned into a piece of dust and disappeared. At the same time, the lights in the entire 5th floor cinema dimmed. All screens, all lights, everything, all lost their previous life at this time, including the ticket sellers at the front desk, cafe waiters, other cleaners, etc., all disappeared at this time. Cobwebs, dust, and everything else began to fill this place. In an instant, this place suddenly turned into a place that had been abandoned for a long time. The rest of the popcorn in the hands of a certain audience also turned black. I don't know how long it has been there. Main mission 1 is completed, and the mission rewards will be settled after leaving the story world. Main mission 2 released. The cinema on the 5th floor symbolizes truth and falsehood. In fact, sometimes, things are often that simple, but people are often blinded by their own negligence, carelessness, impatience, and impetuosity. It is clear that there is only a layer of paper between them and the truth, but they do not pierce it. Instead, they believe in a piece of paper. Lies separated by paper. In fact, the truth is often hidden around the corner. For example, a colleague at the corner who borrowed a lighter. For example, among the shouts of people selling sesame seeds on the roadside. For example, someone murmurs in his sleep. For example, many. The fourth floor is a playground. In the amusement park, there is a card with a portrait of the Joker on it. Find it and you can complete the main task 2. Main Mission 3, released after the completion of Main Mission 2. Dear listeners, although it is a pity that 3 of our good friends have left us, I hope you will not be discouraged or depressed, let alone depressed. Because you will continue to die. If you don't cheer up, you may be among those who die. The sound of the terror broadcast rang in the ears of all listeners. The peaked hat looked at Subai, then turned and walked directly to the elevator. After some people looked at Subai, they followed the peaked hat to the elevator, preparing to go to the 4th floor. They all saw the scene clearly and knew who was the one who completed the task in the end. It turned out that the answer was really simple, just asking more NPCs. However, the deaths of the 3 audience members made most of them change their minds. He had to tie his hands and couldn't let go. As a result, Subai, who was not particularly enthusiastic about the story, got the jackpot. It must be said that it was also a great irony. After all, Subai didn't really think about it from beginning to end. What contribution has he made? Zhenyu and the man in sunglasses walked to Subai. The man in sunglasses rubbed his hands. Actually, I wanted to ask before you could just now. You're scared after all, aren't you? Zhenyu exposed the man in sunglasses mercilessly. Tisk, it doesn't matter. After all, the story point is not as important as my own life. This mission is too evil. The key is that Chu Ting's death scene is too direct and does not give any chance to resist. This is the most terrifying thing. Let's go down, Subai said. Subai and the other 3 were among the last group to go down from the 5th floor to the 4th floor. At this time, all the amusement facilities on the 4th floor were lit up and running. There were children's roller coasters, various game consoles, etc., but, when he stood on the 4th floor, even though his mentality was as hard as Subai's, he couldn't help but feel a headache. Because there is a thick layer of cards on the entire 4th floor. God knows how many cards there are. Moreover, according to the habits and aesthetics of horror broadcasts, there is probably only one card here with a clown pattern. There are countless cards on the ground alone, and there are also cards stuffed in various gaps, stuck in game consoles, and other places where cards can be stuffed. The total adds up to just, massive. And, without exception, all the cards are face up and look exactly the same. Everyone, look for it slowly. Throw all the pictures that are not clowns into one place and don't make the search more difficult. The peaked hat began to give instructions. He actually uses chicken feathers as command arrows, and thinks of himself as the captain. The man in sunglasses curled his lips disdainfully. He led everyone to force Chu Ting to death before, but now he has the nerve to give orders here. Actually, all of us had a share in forcing Chu Ting to death. Even if we didn't speak to stop it or agree with it, we acquiesced in their choice. After all, in our subconscious, we let an outsider like Chu Ting take the risk. It's much better than taking risks on your own. Subai casually opened a few cards on the armrest, all of which were other cartoon patterns. After saying these words, Subai suddenly remembered the ramen shop incident he had encountered before. In fact, many things really only depend on the but. Subai once ridiculed a group. A small number of people are extreme, but most people he is silently enjoying the benefits brought to him by those extreme people. Isn't the scene exactly the same as what he did before? After all, a nation is composed of an individual, and nationality actually depends to a large extent on human nature. Just when everyone was looking for the card, a wall clock in the playground suddenly rang, and sound waves rippled away. Subai frowned slightly, subconsciously holding onto a game console next to him to maintain a standing posture, while the rest of the people were swaying more and more. Even Zhenyu walked a few steps on high heels and found that she was really when I couldn't hold it any longer. I leaned on a game table next to me. Gradually, Subai found that his consciousness was slowly falling into a trance, and his sleepiness was getting heavier and heavier. The sounds of the surrounding amusement park also began to fade away, but the effect was getting heavier and heavier, as if at this moment there was only this distant voice left in his mind. Finally, Subai's vision began to distort. When he was seeing the things in front of him clearly, he found that he was sitting in front of a very exquisite table. There were 3 sets of cutlery on the table. Beside it, there was a butler and a woman. The servant stood aside respectfully. But I was the only one at the dinner table. He was wearing a small suit and a napkin around his neck, looking very meticulous. However, the more this happens, the more you can feel a feeling of loneliness and coldness. His parents are no longer here, but on the dining table, he still stubbornly keeps the tableware that belongs to his parents, even if they will never appear again. Even if no one will use the 2 sets of tableware in front of him, Subai is still like this. Hold on. A feeling of heartache and suffocation kept squeezing Subai's heart. Xiao Subai, who was sitting at the dining table, kept shaking his head with a look of pain on his face. Boom! Little Subai slapped the table and made a muffled sound. Immediately afterwards, little Subai hugged his head and got down from the chair. The lonely table, the exquisite dishes, and the 2 sets of unused tableware almost became the biggest shadow in Subai's heart since he was a child. Later, Subai couldn't bear it all, so he left Chengdu. I went to school in Jiangsu and Zhejiang areas, mostly to avoid the dining table at home. Later, the old housekeeper passed away, and the old maid also passed away, and Subai went back to mourn. During the years when he left, the old housekeeper and the old maid had been taking care of the Su family's house in Chengdu, but that house later, even if Subai occasionally returned to Chengdu, he would not live there, but would choose an apartment to stay. The hardest thing to bear is often the memories. However, Subai has actually been looking down on these memories for a long time, or in other words, he has jumped out of them for a long time. The monk once said to Subai that one of Subai's advantages lies in his perfect state of mind. It's not that Subai said how strong Subai's state of mind is, but that Subai spent a long time basically getting over the psychological shadows of the past. Although he has developed an extreme personality and even a twisted spirit, it is also a way to fill in holes and protect himself. If he encounters an opponent who is good at using mental power in the future, unless the strength gap is really too big, the opponent will. It is difficult to exploit Subai's psychological weakness to make an issue. The female doctor who attacked her in Xi'an hospital failed in the end. The reason was also due to this. Others collapsed when they reached the maximum limit of their psychological endurance, but Subai exploded violently. Little Subai pushed away the old housekeeper's support, pushed away the old maid's support, opened the door, and ran out. His parents are already dead. Already dead, already dead. Now that he is dead, there is no need for him to continue to be immersed in that memory environment. Finally, the picture began to distort and break. Obviously, this illusion could no longer restrain Subai. As he ran along, Xiao Subai's body began to grow slowly, and the surrounding environment continued to become transparent and illusory. In the end, Subai raised his head, beads of sweat dripping down, and the illusion completely disappeared. The fresh air was inhaled into the lungs, and the whole person felt relaxed, as if he had experienced a spiritual massage, but the process was extremely depressing and terrifying. Suddenly, Sudbai felt a chill on his back. He looked up in shock and found that on the floor above him, there were people staggering around one by one. There were also people who seemed to have woken up and were groping for the cards on the ground. But why is my perspective so strange? Sudbai's body trembled suddenly. He turned around and found the elevator. He actually ran from the fourth floor to the third floor unknowingly while breaking the illusion. As an experienced listener, Sudbai certainly understood the consequences of leaving the scope of mission activities without authorization. Oh. One after another sobs issued quietly. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 345. The third and second floors are clothing specialty areas, with many clothing items lined up in rows, and at the same time, mannequins stand there one by one. Normally when people are coming and going, I don't think it's anything, but when the entire area is empty, seeing these dummies wearing clothes can often give people a sense of scalp-tingling horror. Sudbai clearly knew that he was in trouble this time and had left the plot limits. This was almost as incredible as a firefighter forgetting to turn off the gas at home. Cha! Behind you, Sudbai, a mannequin wearing a red suit suddenly trembled, and then his hand moved directly towards Sudbai, who was leaning against him. Puff! Sudbai felt a sudden twitch in his back, and his whole body was knocked away and lay on the ground. The mannequin slowly walked down, his hands were empty, but as the victim, Sudbai knew clearly that he had just been hit in the back by a knife. If it hadn't been for the last moment, Sudbai had a feeling of Jingzhao subconsciously moved a little distance forward, maybe he had been split in half by a knife. So, even though the dummy doesn't have anything in his hand, he is actually holding an invisible knife in his hand. The injury on his back was recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. Although the pain was still there, Sudbai slowly stood up. The vampire clan had such an advantage, and as a mutated vampire clan that mainly focused on melee combat, Sudbai slowly stood up. As a bloodline holder, Sudbai's utilitarian ally stimulated the self-recovery ability of the vampires to the extreme. After all, he doesn't know how to do vampire magic. The dummy didn't give Sudbai much time to rest. The next moment, he rushed over and waved his hands like before. Sudbai's nails grew out, exuding a cold air. The vampire state and the zombie state reached a fusion at this time. After all, the Hellfire shotgun was not allowed to be brought in by the horror broadcast this time, and Sudbai did not take advantage of it. Weapons, you can't just use a clothes pole to fight the enemy, you will probably die miserably. The figure dodged, and the position where Sudbai was standing dented at this moment. It was obviously cut down by a knife. Then, the dummy swept across with one hand, and Sudbai grabbed it out with keen fingers. Wow! A series of crisp sounds were heard, setting off a string of sparks. After a stalemate, Sudbai's 10 fingers grasped the opponent's invisible knife in this way. The dummy retreated, preparing to draw the knife. Sudbai took a step further, throwing the knife forward with both hands, trying to forcefully close the distance between the dummy and himself in this way and then carry out a close attack. However, when Sudbai exerted his strength, the knife that could have been touched suddenly dissipated into nothingness. The knife seemed to have completely disappeared. Sudbai grabbed it empty. Naturally, the dummy was not brought over. Instead, Sudbai grabbed it. Shiro threw himself staggeringly towards the dummy. The other hand of the dummy waved down, and Sudbai's figure exploded at this moment, turning into a blood mist. The dummy's invisible knife struck the blood mist, and the blood mist quickly moved back, 8 meters away. The position was recondensed, and a scar was drawn from Sudbai's chest to his abdomen, and blood flowed out gurglingly. After all, the blood mist state does not ignore physical attacks, but can weaken the attack damage as much as possible. Damn, you can switch the sword at will. This skill is too buggy. Subai reached out and touched his chest, then put his fingers on the tip of his tongue and licked it. The smell of blood filled his mouth, making Subai even more excited. The dummy rushed over again. To be honest, the dummy's speed was not very fast, but when fighting him, every move he made seemed to have a natural meaning, as if he was fighting an ancient martial arts master. Every move he made was so natural, and a very concise sword stroke could often achieve the greatest effect. Even though Subai had the advantage in speed, he was still suppressed by the dummy and lost his temper. This time, Subai dealt with the dummy for a longer time, and Subai did not take the initiative to launch an offensive. The knife really gave Subai a headache. It could not be seen or touched, and it could disappear and appear at will. There is a feeling of being hard to guard against. Boom. The dummy took a step forward, raised his hands, and slashed Hwashin with the knife. Subai took a step back to the left, but the waist of the dummy twisted in an extremely exaggerated way at this time, and Hwashin Mountain was cut in half in an instant. This change was unexpected by Subai. For a moment, he could only hold himself up with both hands, and took the initiative to move forward with his 10 nails wrapped in the zombie's cold air. Bang bang bang. A series of explosions came, and Subai's whole body was swept away by the air wave rolled up by the sword, knocking over many clothes hangers. When he raised his hands, they were covered in blood, and his fingernails were turned up. Obviously, in hard nail, facing this situation, he was at a disadvantage. Subai once again complained in his heart about the stinginess of this terrorist broadcast. If he had the Hellfire shotgun by his side this time, he would not be able to do it anyway. The worst thing about ending up in such an embarrassing situation is that the Hellfire shotgun is still strong enough to be trusted. Subai can use it as a mallet to smash it. The dummy held the knife in his hand, raised his hand, faced Subai, and continued walking slowly. Grass. Subai cursed, because it was obvious that this dummy was determined to fight him to death. On the upper floor, the audience continued to search for the cards as if they could not see the situation below. Some people seemed not to have it yet. After waking up from the illusion, he fell asleep. Therefore, at this time and at this place, there was only the unlucky Subai. In fact, if Subai had not been so eager to break the illusion, he might not have rushed down the stairs to the next floor without realizing it. This was actually the most depressing point. The dummy attacked again. Subai put his hands on the ground. New nails were growing out, and his fingers were connected to his heart. The pain was understandable, but Subai still gritted his teeth and shook himself off after the nails grew out. Got out. The dummy squatted down, raised the knife, and stabbed diagonally. Puff. The invisible knife directly penetrated Subai's right chest. At this moment, Subai was like a squid that was brought to the chopping board, skewered on a toothpick, and just waiting to be cooked in the pot. However, Subai's ruthlessness was revealed at this time. The real ruthlessness lies not in how ruthless he is to others, but in how ruthless he is to himself. Ah 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 ah. Subai let out a long roar, grabbed the invisible knife with one hand, and then took the initiative to send himself down. Puff. This was equivalent to Subai taking the initiative to move forward, letting the invisible knife continue to penetrate his body. In this self-mutilation method, Subai finally succeeded in closing the distance between himself and the dummy for the first time. Snapped. Subai's right palm slapped the dummy's face. To be honest, this was a fatal blow for Subai, and it could even be said to be a bit frustrating, because compared to the damage caused by the dummy, the damage caused by Subai's palm was really nothing. However, sometimes many things are done unintentionally. The body structure of the dummy is really different from Subai. Subai is a mixture of blood and zombie blood, a mutant, and the dummy is not a real person after all. If we think about it and explain it from another perspective, since the horror broadcast has given him such a buggy knife, and also given him an ability that is no less than that of a real ancient martial arts master, then naturally it is impossible to give the dummy a body as powerful as the listener. Otherwise it will really not give the audience a way to survive. Sudbai's nails pierced the dummy's head, and cracks appeared on the dummy's head, and the cracks began to spread continuously, gradually spreading to his whole body, and then the dummy began to shatter. Plop! Sudbai fell to the ground, and beside him, there were plastic fragments on the ground. His face was pale, his body was weak, and even his breathing became intermittent. It took a lot of luck to anally kill this dummy, but Sudbai still won after all. Even though he was so weak, Sudbai still managed to get up and kept groping the ground with his hands. "Where's the knife? Where's the knife? Where's the knife?" That invisible knife left a deep impression on Sudbai. If he could get it and treat it as a trophy, it would all be worthwhile. But now he couldn't find it. Finally, Sudbai was discouraged. "Damn, you're so stingy." There was only a red suit on the ground. Ahem, cough, cough. Due to the continuous severe injuries, Sudbai's recovery ability began to become weaker and weaker. The superficial injuries on his body were healed, but the internal injuries still needed some time to heal. Moreover, since wool comes from a sheep, this kind of injury recovery actually consumes Sudbai's own strength. Picking up the red suit, Sudbai remembered that he had exchanged a black windbreaker with Fatty before, which could give him a speed boost. However, as his strength improved and he could transform into blood mist, the black windbreaker became a burden. In fact, many of the things Sudbai obtained in the past are of little use to Sudbai now. Looking up, he saw that the people on the upper floor were still looking for cards. Sudbai was about to get up. "Let's go up first and talk later." Dragging his tired body slowly towards the elevator, when passing by a boutique store, Sudbai's eyes couldn't help but be attracted by a dark black windbreaker placed at the door. Every stitch of this windbreaker seemed to scratch Sudbai's eyes. Bizich is definitely the world's top design level. However, in line with the idea that doing more is worse than doing less, Sudbai walked directly over without stopping at all. When Sudbai just stepped on the steps of the elevator, the windbreaker quietly floated up from the hangar and slowly landed on a smooth dummy. For a time, there was an aura of death on this dummy, as if Ashura from hell opened his eyes. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 346. The windbreaker that catches Sudbai's eyes can already show that its style are really at an extremely high level. Although Sudbai has no money now, since he was a child, young Master Su has always been born with a golden spoon. Yes, the taste and style are naturally very high, and the eye for seeing things is naturally not bad. However, it is ironic enough. From the side, Sudbai does have good taste, and this windbreaker did not disappoint Sudbai, or it was a big surprise for Sudbai. As soon as Sudbai stepped on the steps of the elevator, he immediately felt the temperature behind him suddenly freezing. This coldness did not come from the surface of the body, but a tremor from the depths of his soul. Just like the trembling feeling when a moth approaches a candle and the soul is on the verge of death. Without looking back, and with no time to look back, Sudbai's body sank suddenly, ready to rush upstairs. He had to leave this floor as soon as possible and return to the upper floor. The changes outside the scope of the main plot made Sudbai really, very headache. However, the speed of that thing was faster than Sudbai. The dummy actually flew up and stopped in the middle of the stairs in the blink of an eye, intercepting Sudbai. The windbreaker on the dummy obviously has the ability to stay in the air. His feet were suspended on the elevator, with no expression or eyes, and he was looking at Sudbai coldly. But this feeling made people feel that it was showing disdain. In a sneer. You cheated, and you can still fly." Sudbai shook his head speechlessly, and at the same time, his body's center of gravity began to slowly sink. Whoosh! A sound that broke through the air came. The dummy quickly got close to Sudbai and grabbed Sudbai's neck with one hand at an extremely fast speed. Sudbai immediately supported the elevator handrail with both arms and jumped backwards with a flip. However, when Sudbai just stood firm on the ground, the dummy flew all the way and met Sudbai again, flying in a straight line. The speed is definitely much faster than Sudbai. Buzz! A trembling sound came, and the windbreaker on the dummy suddenly fell off at this moment. Immediately, the sleeves of the windbreaker flicked and hit Sudbai's neck. This really caught Sudbai off guard. Who could have expected this? Clothes can actually hit people on their own? Moreover, the beating hurt so much. Boom! The blow was very heavy, and Sudbai was thrown away again. He fell hard on the hard tile floor and slid for more than 10 meters. Ever since he came to this floor, Sudbai didn't even remember that it was him. This was the first time I was whipped out like this. The windbreaker returned to the dummy again, and the dummy regained its ability to move. As if a cat was playing with a mouse, the dummy walked towards Sudbai step by step. It was as if he had endured loneliness for an unknown amount of time, and suddenly a toy appeared in front of him, so he planned to play with it to his heart's content and was reluctant to smash the toy in one go. After Sudbai experienced the previous fight with another dummy in a red suit, he was really scarred and had spent most of his energy. He really felt powerless. The dummy walked to Sudbai, squatted down, stretched out his hand, and grabbed Sudbai's neck. Sudbai didn't resist, he just stared at the dummy calmly, no, at the windbreaker on the dummy. The dummy stood up, lifted Sudbai up, and seemed to be looking at his toy carefully. Some people, some things, and their thinking patterns really cannot be substituted into the utilitarian thinking of ordinary characters, especially some indigenous people in the story world. As an audience, it is difficult to understand and empathize with the years before the story mission begins. What kind of living condition do they live in? If it is a story world with an ecosystem, that would be fine. But for this type of story world, it is estimated that horror broadcasters will be in eternal loneliness before they use it as a story scene. They are in a closed state, so it is not surprising at all to torture these natives into psychosis. Wisps of coldness spread out from Sudbai's body. This was the breath of cold poison. Sudbai didn't resist, but it didn't mean that Sudbai was going to sit back and die. With Sudbai's character, even if he reached the end of his rope, he will also use his last bit of strength to bite off the enemy's ears. This time, Sudbai jumped out of the trap inexplicably. He couldn't blame others. The key was that Sudbai's own resistance in the illusion was too high. Even when he broke through the illusion as quickly as possible, he felt like he was sleepwalking. If you go to the next level and deviate from the main line of the story, you will inevitably be punished. Just like a character in a story who never appears after appearing at the beginning, the person listening to the story may ask about the story near the end. Why has that character never appeared? The storyteller will not say that he has forgotten, but will just casually make up the simplest and most trouble-free ending for that character. Oh, that man, he's dead. This fits the character of horror broadcasting very well. The sleeves of the windbreaker kept kneading Sudbai's body. The feeling of flesh and blood and the feeling of a living body made it feel very novel. This was a living body that it had never seen before, and it was full of curiosity about it. At the same time, he is also full of jealousy and hatred. Why can you have flesh and blood? Why can you have temperature? Why can you have life? Why can you have freedom? Why don't I have everything you have? Why is this? The cuff pin of the windbreaker was deliberately inserted into Sudbai's neck. Seeing Sudbai's blood constantly flowing out, it became more and more excited. The temperature and color of the blood symbolized the state of life. The windbreaker was wanton. As he played with it, blood holes were poked out on Sudbai's body, like a tireless child, playing with his toy wantonly, even harming it. Anyway, in Fenyi's heart, this toy, in the end, it will be destroyed by itself. It does not allow a toy to have so many things that it does not have. Amusement parks are the holy places in every child's heart. Play is also the release of human nature. Many adults, when they were children, did not have enough conditions to go to amusement parks, so it is more or less a pity. Many children always feel that they don't have enough time to play in the amusement park, and they have to go back every time without having fun. Therefore, the amusement park is also a place full of dreams and fantasies. Every toy, every game console, every prop, every coin input, and the sounds they emit are all so beautiful. So fascinating. At this moment, the sound of the terrorist broadcast sounded in Sudbai's ears. Sudbai was stunned, and at the same time he felt ecstatic. They had found the clown card, and they had completed the main task too. This also meant that the rest of the audience was about to come down and enter this level. By then, their chances of survival would be even greater. Big. Two people sleep here forever, and their dreams merge with the amusement park to form a more beautiful picture and moment. Human life is not about length, but quality. If given the opportunity, choosing one kind of eternity or another kind of momentary youth is an interpretation and respect for life. Now, please go to the next floor. The 2 floors below are all clothing specialty areas, but every piece of clothing here has its own character. Yes, character. These 2 layers are all clothes with characters. Some of them are transformed by the undead, some are covered by ferocious beasts, and some are exiled magic weapons. But without exception, they are born with a kind of disgust and rejection of life. After all, they are dead things, and you are living creatures. The meaning of their existence is to turn all lives that try to pass through these 2 levels into existences as cold as themselves, and accompany them to endure the endless loneliness in these years. Main Mission 3, pass the 3rd and 2nd floors and enter the bottom floor within 24 hours. Listeners, I will be waiting for you at the bottom. Now, 5 listeners have left us, and there are still 10 listeners left. I am looking forward to seeing how many people can finally reach the bottom successfully. Real. Am looking forward to. Hiss. A gust of wind blew, and the red suit that Sudbai had hit on the ground floated and returned to its original position. At the same time, all the pieces of the dummy that Sudbai had smashed to pieces on the ground also disappeared. It dissipated, regrouped, and stood at its original position. This is clearing the place. Because the next scene of the plot will happen here. Everything must be restored to its original state. The listeners on the upper floor are already waiting at the elevator entrance and are ready to come down. What they will face is the next life and death level prepared for them by the horror broadcast. The black trench coat in front of Sudbai gradually separated from the dummy at this time and was about to return to its original place. The dummy also retreated directly into the distance. However, Sudbai, who had been silent before, suddenly opened his mouth and let out a sharp roar. The cold air that had been soaked around him was completely boiling at this time, and layers of frost kept covering it up like a facial mask, so fast that it was simply staggering. The black windbreaker was imprisoned in the air forcibly. Blood began to overflow from the corners of Sudbai's eyes, and there was a flush on his face. After all, his condition was already in poor condition, and the zombie cold poison in his body was forced out. Undoubtedly, it pushed the already poor body further to the edge of the cliff. But Sudbai is like this. If you bite me, I will risk my life to bite you back. Come. Don't you treat me like a toy. Come. Don't you think you can need me as much as you want? Come. Let me see. I am a listener, and no matter how formatted the scene of horror broadcast is, it will not format me, but what about you? What are you? An indigenous windbreaker in the story world? I really think you can go to heaven.